What happens when love triggers a neighborhood war over legacy zoning? Join me as I transform an absurd feud into a quest for justice, revealing the hypocrisy lurking behind manicured lawns. Hey there, Porch Patrol Squad. Let me know if you've ever locked horns with a Karen like in today's story. Smash that like button and spill the tea in the comments. And if you're craving more outrageous HOA battles, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. Believe me, you don't want to miss how this unfolds. As the cheers reverberated through the indigo sky, I couldn't quite shake the exhilarating feeling that we had turned a corner in this ongoing battle with Cynthia Barlow. Standing there, microphone in hand like a victorious gladiator, I felt like I could conquer the world, or at least our neighborhood. The energy in the yard surged, with neighbors picking up the momentum like it was a hot potato, each wisecrack woven into the fabric of our newfound revolt against the all-knowing HOA queen. I spotted Mrs. Becker from 4 houses down, pulling up her lawn chair to join our spirited assembly. Her hefty husband wheeled out the grill for impromptu burgers. It all felt so anarchically brilliant, a rebellion fueled by BBQ smoke and the laughter of children. I grinned at Luis, who had unofficially declared himself the ringmaster of our extravagant circus. This was not merely a party, it was an uprising steeped in laughter, the greatest weapon of all. But just as I was sculpting the perfect vision of community togetherness, Marge, still reeling from the unexpected transformation of our backyard, from a pretty flower bed of oppression to a dance floor of acceptance, stormed back into her house. With all the finesse of a toddler throwing a tantrum, the heavy front door slammed shut, resonating through the air like a cannon blast fired in futility. I half expected her to emerge wearing a hazmat suit, shielded from the infectious joy that permeated the air. I could already envision the headlines. Marge Barlow, neighborhood sorepuss, rattled by festivities, conspires to reestablish reign of tyranny. The thought kept me doubled over with laughter, but even I couldn't shake the curiosity that fluttered in my stomach. What kind of great counterattack would she dream up next? Would she try to enforce a neighborhood curfew? Or perhaps soon place all our decorative lights under regulation scrutiny? It wasn't long before the answer stepped out from behind those pristine white shutters. A swift, determined figure materialized. Wait, was that a clipboard? Marge stormed back outside, arms akimbo, as if she were the very embodiment of neighborhood regulation itself. "Listen up, people. I'm here to lay down the law," she bellowed, the clipboard waving like a conductor at a symphony of chaos. A wave of stunned silence fell over our congregation, but only for a moment. Then, one brave soul, a dear neighbor named Gary, shouted, "And what law would that be? Thou shalt not have fun." The crowd broke into a fit of giggles again, which only sent Marge further into a tizzy. Who knew the women of our cul-de-sac secretly had a comedy club in them, waiting for the right moment to emerge? Precisely. According to Section 4B of our owner-occupant amendment, any gatherings of this nature are strictly prohibited without HOA approval, she roared back, her eyes scanning the crowd, searching for any hint of remorse. Had she still not caught on to the fact that we simply didn't give a flip about her compliance checklist? Luis, tapping into his inner lawyer, stood tall, arms crossed with a cheeky smile. "But who did the review of that amendment last time? Wasn't it just you?" He chimed in, the crowd erupting into laughter again. I felt a swell of pride as our community began to find its voice against Marge's feeble attempts to quash our spirit. This battle was becoming a masterclass in the absurdity of entitlement. Who knew neighborhood drama could be so painfully entertaining? But the pièce de résistance arrived as Marge, clearly flustered and grasping at straws, reached for a paper to threaten legal action with, waving it overhead like an Olympic torch of entitlement. "Mark my words, I will not stand for this blatant disregard for regulations. I'll have everyone involved sued for chaos." She huffed, her cheeks puffing up like a disgruntled chipmunk, ready to take flight as our laughter crescendoed. Chaos? That implausibly vague and hilariously exaggerated term became our new battle cry. I leaned into the mic, igniting my inner advocate, and declared, "All right, who's in for a neighborhood BBQ fest every Saturday until we cement the change? After all, what's a little chaos when it's comfortable chaos?" The roars of approval rang louder than any HOA rule, shaking windows and perhaps even her carefully curated aesthetics. Marge seemed to realize she was floundering in an ocean of laughter from which there was no escape, as puzzled as a cat thrown into a swimming pool. She staggered back, swaying slightly, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I witnessed a flicker of doubt in her steely blue eyes, a hint of understanding that her iron grip on our idyllic neighborhood was slipping, not due to laws or amendments, but because friendship and laughter had united us in a way she never could have imagined. The transformation felt electric, and with every cheer that echoed forwards, I knew we were rewriting not just our stories, but her role as the enforcer in the most absurd of ways. As the evening unfolded with revelry, I hadn't just uncovered a newfound spirit in our community. I had also inadvertently lobbed a delightful grenade into the monotonous life of Cynthia Barlow. While the night buzzed with euphoric energy and irritably sweetened cupcakes, the real kicker was that each impromptu blow against her authoritarian grip pushed her to consider whether this stubborn prejudice could ever truly last in the face of joy, unity, and unrelenting love. Would Cynthia Barlow ever realize the party she missed out on was actually the life she craved all along? Or would she simply retreat behind those white shutters and devise firmer rules, all while sipping her decaf coffee and lamenting the end of era in which she ruled as queen? The answer remained shrouded in the flickering lights of our gleeful evening, a delicious mystery awaiting the dawn of tomorrow. Would she surrender, or would it be a bumpy ride into yet another episode of the HOA melodrama? The night air was thick with the sweet aroma of grilled burgers and the soft melodies of laughter, blending together into an intoxicating symphony that seemed to mock Marge's relentless grip on order. As our neighbors mingled and swapped stories, I reveled in our small act of rebellion, each chuckle adding another layer of empowerment to our mission. There, amidst the buzz, I caught sight of Cynthia stalking around her yard like a vengeful squirrel preparing for winter. Part of me wondered if she had accidentally snorted some of that high-octane community spirit wafting over from our gathering. After all, when facing the threat of joy, one often reacts unpredictably, and as comedic fate would have it, this night was ours. As I brewed a backup batch of those legendary BBQ hot wings I'd become famous for, I felt an unexpected tap on my shoulder. It was Luis, leaning casually against the counter with that mischievous glint in his eye that suggested he was hatching something spectacular. "What if we turn this gathering into a full-blown community festival?" he proposed. And honestly, the idea was so ludicrously fantastic that I couldn't help but burst into laughter. "You mean like an anti-HOA festival, celebrating every questionable regulation they've ever imposed?" I imagined a giant inflatable Marge mascot accompanied by disco music for effect. Luis joined in on my laughter before dropping his tone. "Exactly. They'll either feel so ridiculous they'll have to lighten up, or we push the envelope farther until they're drowning in their own rules." The vision flooded my mind with pure hilarity, tangling with rebellious glee at the thought of turning our joy into a community tradition, rather than mere defiance. Convinced that this was not just a burst of whimsy, but rather the spark we needed to rally our neighbors, I sprang into action, rallying the troops with the fervor of a revved-up motivational speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to unite against the absurd. I hereby declare our inaugural Chaos Festival," I announced, prompting cheers that nearly shook the windows of the Barlow's house. The rush of enthusiasm was palpable, and it felt like a wave of camaraderie rolled over the crowd. Organizing booths oozing with junky prizes and questionable contests suddenly seemed like the most natural course of action in our little neighborhood saga. We decided on activities ranging from the worst lawn decoration contest to a cooking showdown that only brilliant home chefs like myself could turn into culinary masterpieces, or complete disasters that would further deepen our legacy of merry chaos. In an utterly poetic twist befitting such an absurd situation, I found myself cooking side by side with Gary, whose dedication to the art of grilling was rivaled only by his passion for creating culinary disasters. "Jordan, this will be your crowning achievement, or the reason they call in a fire truck," he laughed, tossing a questionable cut of meat onto the grill while I scrambled to flip burgers, like an Olympian competing for gold. "The people need drama," I proclaimed, served with a side of sarcasm as I patted down the charred remains of dinner from last week, hanging over the grill like trophies of battle conquered. Laughter resounded amidst our neighborly enterprises, as each chuckle felt like another blow against Marge's austere reign. The festival soon began taking shape, beautifully chaotic with a pie fight competition already being planned by Mrs. Becker that sent shockwaves of laughter through the crowd gathered around us. Yet somehow, amidst the fun of hosting and revolutionizing the concept of HOA resistance, we could feel Cynthia looming in the background like a dark cloud ready to deliver a hefty downpour. She'd barricaded herself from the festival crowds, posting up by her meticulously manicured garden, clutching that clipboard as if it were the string to her fragile authority. "What a wonderfully surprising twist in neighborly tension this is," I mused aloud to Louise. "Hasn't she learned that everyone here has collectively decided to ignore her rules like they're mere suggestions?" Louise chuckled, nodding vigorously. "But that's the beauty of it, isn't it? She's on the outside looking in, and that's precisely where we want her." As we plotted ways to keep her at bay, a sly plan bubbled to the surface, a festive protest parade, led by none other than Mr. Johnson on his riding lawnmower dressed up like a float. The chaos parade kicked off without a hitch, bringing a fearless brigade of our jubilant neighbors rampaging past unharmed. Dressed in wild costumes that would make a circus blush, we paraded in defiance, loud music blaring from Luis's makeshift sound system, as Gary donned a glittering, sequined jacket, throwing confetti left and right in sheer delight. Each wave of confetti shot up into the sky like an exclamation point against Marge's paper-thin authority. I was in complete awe at how our community, once gripped by the ridiculousness of rules and fear of disapproval, had collectively transformed that concern into vibrant joy. Sweeping past Cynthia's gates in a sprawling procession of color and laughter felt like a triumph worthy of a movie scene, where every hesitation evaporated under the glow of pure fun. Just when I thought we had caught the elusive wisp of victory, the impossible happened. A sound erupted from behind me, an unmistakable phone ring, cut through the air like a sword of justice, heralding our very own Cynthia Barlow, in the midst of feverishly dialing the authorities. Apparently, laughter and joy were punishable offenses warranted police intervention in her boundless reality. "Oh, Cynthia," I said in mock condescension. "Sometimes a little petty humor provides the best therapy." "You're calling the cops on a parade of unity because of a little chaos?" I asked, feigning horror whilst a mischievous smile crept up on my lips. The incoming surge of adrenaline prompted us to stand taller, as we chanted resonant cheers that echoed against her sensibilities, like a wave crashing against a cliff face, shaking the hallowed grounds of her self-imposed dictatorship. With the police phone call being the cherry atop this marathon of absurdity, we watched as Marge's facade crumbled. By the time the police arrived, it was like they stepped into an alternative universe, booming with exuberance they could hardly fathom. They took one look at our band of joyful misfits and burst into grins, joining us in our rhythm of rebellion. Quite fabulously, they left the scene, shaking their heads lightly at the ludicrousness of it all. As that squad of uniforms retreated, I felt exhilarated, like we had turned the corner into exhilarating unknowns. Maybe I wasn't just fighting for my interracial marriage anymore. We had all committed to dismantling an antiquated system one laugh at a time. This was the community I'd always hoped for, energized by the resilience of joy, laughter, and a shared refusal to bow to entitlement. In the end, what would Cynthia Barlow do? Would she ever get her reign back after this glorious night? Or had we indeed turned the lights on for accountability in a new, everlasting community spirit? As Marge stood there, a vision of judgment in her tailored blouse and an expression that could sour milk, I chuckled nervously, unsure whether to cry, laugh, or grab my camera for the next viral social media moment. I mean, Seriously, who knew love could be considered as disruptive as a chainsaw convention? Jamal, bless him, shifted nervously beside me, clearly weighing whether this madness was worth the stress just weeks before our wedding. The neighbors in our cookie-cutter suburban paradise had stored up enough gossip to fuel an entire reality show season. But when Marge announced our marriage was violating legacy zoning, it was as if someone lit a fuse on her ludicrousness. Somehow, our intent to exchange vows was singled out as a profound threat, punctuation marks in her mind that threatened to turn our pristinely manicured lawns into a battlefield. The absurdity seeped in, wrapping around me like the warm hugs of grandma, comfortable and bittersweet. My fiery spirit ignited hotter than a jalapeno cheese dip, and suddenly, I grasped the outrageous reality of my situation. This wasn't just about love anymore. This was a crusade against the HOA's egregious entitlement. I turned to Jamal, my heart thumping like a drum solo, and declared boldly, "What if we turned this little debacle into a glorious crusade?" After all, nothing says loving couple quite like turning a neighborhood feud into an investigative quest for human decency and civil rights. Jamal beamed at me, fully aware that my projects had a tendency to escalate into full-blown campaigns. A delightful mix of eagerness and dread danced in his eyes. In the days that followed, I took matters into my own hands, with a fervor reminiscent of a detective in a buddy cop movie. I enlisted the help of my amiable neighbor Luis, who, despite his trademark laid-back attitude, harbored a fierce protective instinct for our joyous union. He may have looked like the chillest guy in the neighborhood, but under that rugged exterior lay a legal mind sharp enough to cut through bureaucracy's most stubborn barriers. "I mean, they can't really prevent you from marrying, right?" he mused as he leaned against his porch railing. "But they can sure make your life a living hell if they try." The irritation gleamed in his brown eyes like sunlight upon freshly polished shoes. I guffawed, and together we schemed about how to turn the HOA's ridiculous red tape into their own hypocritical noose. Armed with the cunning of a raccoon dumpster diving for treasure, we tore through the HOA's regulations, meticulously extracting any rules that contradicted Marge's outrageous claims. Did they also have bylaws against, say, dogs with funny names? I mean, what if my cat was more of a free spirit than they preferred? In this age of memes and social media rants, we opted for a different kind of retribution. What if we investigated their very own bylaws? Luis dove into his legal library, while I brewed pots of coffee, stewing with ideas. With the energy of a sports team preparing for the championship, we plotted our course of action, documenting every infraction and variant that pinched the group's reputation tighter than a pair of ill-fitted Spanx from the thrift store. The pièce de résistance of our plan, however, was undoubtedly the moment we discovered the backstory of our dear Marge and her iron-fisted family legacy, with the HOA housed in a quaint little Facebook group titled Protect the Legacy. What a title! Cringe-worthy at best, but with its own glimmer of promise. We stumbled upon an old scandal, something about her third cousin once painting a fence an unconventional color that nearly sent the neighborhood into a tizzy. At that point, I thought, aha, and felt like Sherlock Holmes on a caffeine high. Presented with these not-so-secret sins of the past, we concocted a formal complaint concerning neighborhood bias to the state's housing authority. Armed with humor-infused anecdotes about Marge's quirky family history and the HOA's blatant hypocrisy. Submitting the complaint required a steady hand and a suppressive laugh as we hit send, turning our frustrations into cathartic rejoicing. In that moment, we had flipped the power dynamic upside down, and it was glorious. Marge would surely have some explaining to do when the members of the state arrived in pursuit of answers. Luis and I could picture her panic, rambling like a deer caught under bright headlights, glorying in her own scripted world of control. Then, as if on cue, the mailbox clinked, revealing a letter from the state that proclaimed every HOA's worst nightmare: an investigation into possible discrimination based on race. Oh, the delicious irony! The universe had a funny way of aligning the stars for a little poetic justice. At the end of it all, as I stared at Jamal and Luis, both unjustly enthralled by our audacious escapade, I couldn't help but think of the wonderful mayhem we had brewed, intertwined with humor and unshakable camaraderie. As we awaited the electrifying showdown with Marge's HOA, buoyed by our newfound strength against the forces of outdated beliefs, we raised our glasses in a toast. To love conquering all, across legacy zoning. I grinned, and we laughed heartily, relishing in the triumph that had come from fighting not just for ourselves, but for anyone else struggling against the absurdities of prejudice in this world. And I knew this was only the beginning of our little rebellion. What would Marge do next? As the day of reckoning approached, the palpable tension became a comedic fog hovering over our neighborhood. I watched with glee as Marge's prissy disposition morphed into a melodramatic harbinger of chaos at the thought of the state's inquiry. The sight of her glaring at my flower beds made me chuckle, realizing the absurdity of a woman whose biggest crisis involved coordinating color swatches at neighborhood meetings, now teetering on the brink of a legal kerfuffle. Luis, leaning casually against his porch, mused triumphantly about how Marge's tight control might just fly out the window when confronted with the authority of the state. We relished our role as unintentional insurgents, each bit of gossip morphing into an impromptu episode of Keeping Up with the HOA. Not one to waste a spectacular calamity, I decided our little victory deserved a proper send-off and planned a pre-show engagement party dubbed Love Conquers All, Even Legacy Zoning, with the neighbors caught in our whirlwind of rebellion. I sent out invites emblazoned with playful caricatures of Marge squinting disapprovingly at a rainbow wedding cake, the RSVP list flooded with surprise and delight at our defiance, and soon, people began filing into my backyard with the enthusiasm of a potluck, eager to see a good show. Luis was already imagining himself as the DJ, mixing beats while spinning tales of our righteous quest to unearth Marge's hypocritical past, and I prepared to lead a toast to love conquering pretentiousness. As the evening simmered with laughter and minor chaos, a dog stealing the last of the drinks and the neighbor's toddler releasing a myriad of helium balloons, flashes of Marge's pompous visage filled my mind. Part of me yearned to witness the panic when her pristinely polished nails dug into freshly laundered fabric as she faced the state investigators. However, that evening was ours. An odyssey bloomed amidst the absurdity of a vindictive, entitled woman. Under the twinkling lights and with drinks in hand, I gave the signal. It was time for our grand toast. To love that defies zoning and overbearing HOA power trips, I cheered, and a raucous wave of enthusiasm followed, egging me on as I sensed the movement of karma in our favor. Just then, we caught a glimpse of Marge through her pristine window, clutching her pearls as though they were life buoys amidst an influx of riotous energy spilling forth from our little gathering. My heart sank into sweet, schadenfreude territory, chuckling at her distressed state among piles of pristine color swatches. Luis and I exchanged conspiratorial glances, his excitement just barely contained as he leaned in with mischief sparkling in his brown eyes. "Should we go investigate? As neighbors?" he asked. And at that moment, it felt less like a neighborly inquiry and more like a full-on reconnaissance mission. With the energy of an espionage film underway, we tiptoed toward Marge's house, the sounds of festivity dying down behind us as we began our stealthy approach. Conversely, Luis and I were the real architects of chaos, both expectant and giddy, as we nudged closer to her fortress of unwarranted judgment. We couldn't help but laugh softly at the absurdity of our situation. Two ordinary guys dolled up like wannabe agents of change on a completely exaggerated yet satisfying mission for justice, well-versed in the art of petty retaliation against the aptly designated village tyrant. Reaching her impeccably manicured door, I knocked lightly, just enough for her likely overworked nerves to scramble in panic. All tension culminated as her door creaked open, revealing Marge in the untypical itself of a high-powered HOA president, flustered and agitated. Peculiar enough, a slight rise of state investigators stationed publicly in front of her abode was less about neighbors and more about a slight taste of justice, served neatly on a porcelain platter. "What do you want?" she hissed, her blue eyes narrowing in suspicion, unsure if we were allies like Zeus, juiced with social media power, or mere enemies of the state. I flashed my warmest grin, relishing the sparkle of comedic karma in this crisis of her own making. Just seeing how my favorite HOA president is holding up with the state poking around. Heard you had a busy week. Marge sputtered indignantly, her petite disposition unable to bear the weight of a petty smirk from her once admired neighbor. My affairs are of no concern to you, she squawked, shaking a fist as if it would ward off any imminent consequences. But as the night progressed and the humor of the moment melded with a reality check, it became evident Marge's self-constructed empire of entitlement was about to crumble under the weight of her hypocritical legacy. Luis and I reveled in our absurdly hilarious wave of rebellion amidst her flustered persona, knowing we danced just outside the lines of societal conformity to live one wild tale of a neighborhood transformed. The suspense hung thick in the air, a bubbling prelude to the fall of an unyielding queen. Would she ever truly acknowledge her role in perpetuating this farce? As I turned to leave, a mischievous thought crossed my mind. Perhaps this charade served as more than just a neighborhood drama. It was a ticket to an epic showdown of laughter, love, and undeniable unity. What more mischief awaited us in our grand adventure? As I stood there, Marge's indignant fuming was almost a performance art. It was as if we had unwittingly walked into an avant-garde play called The HOA President's Meltdown, where the plot twist was both deliciously predictable and utterly hilarious. The attempt at a frightened rage ricocheted off her carefully curated facade like a child's wadded-up piece of paper thrown at a brick wall. I savored the moment, the warm, triumphant glow of knowing that the real power of this narrative lay not in her hands, but in the chaotic symphony of unity, laughter, and exasperation blossoming behind us. I leaned in conspiratorially. You know, my dear Marge, there's a grand party happening just a few feet away. You really should join. It's titled, Love Conquers All, even Legacy Zoning. I even made a cake in your honor. Her jaw clenched, and I could almost see the steam rising from her head. The sheer ridiculousness of her own situation would have made a seasoned stand-up comedian blush. You think I would mingle with those people? She spat, as if the very notion of mingling with my interracial wedding guests was tantamount to mingling with a herd of wild boars. My smirk widened. After all, little did she know that the walls of her pristine domain were beginning to crumble. It was time for the grand reveal. Her oppressive regime had met its match in the form of my unapologetically hilarious band of merry misfits. Oh, come now, Marge. What better way to address your relationships with the community than by mingling with us? Plus, you could use the group therapy, let's call it HOA healing. Luis suppressed a snicker, prompting me to throw a knowing wink in his direction, my dynamic partner in this act of uncharacteristic rebellion. Marge's reaction was priceless. She seemed caught between wanting to scream and wanting to figure out how to keep her pristine reputation intact. The palpable absurdity of it was almost too divine to bear. I have nothing to discuss with you. The state is investigating your little gathering, and I will be vindicated for my concerns. You can't emerge into our neighborhood dynamics with joyful flamboyance. It's a breach of decorum. She huffed, brandishing her displeasure like a baton in a poorly orchestrated marching band. Oh, but dearest Marge, I shot back with sarcasm dripping like honey. Isn't it hilarious how emergency meetings about zoning regulations have turned into an episode of nationwide infamy? This whole situation is as entertaining as it gets. Just picture it. A progressive party with a generous serving of cocktails and a side of #activism. My words sailed into the thick air, palpable with laughter and rebellion. Marge's expression was a portrait of righteous indignation. Her coiled fists, glimmering pearl necklace, and defiant blue gaze fixed on me as if I were the culprit behind her ultimate demise. I imagined her high school self screaming that I was not even conforming to HOA standards, a notion that only fueled my growing sense of triumph. I watched as Marge's defenses began to shake like an old rickety house in a windstorm. That's when Luis theatrically joined in, arms crossed against a backdrop of festive lights. leaning in as if sharing a riveting secret. You see, Marge, in the wake of your previous voicemail, we discovered that the narrative of who belongs here has evolved. Who knew that your outdated ideas of neighborhood governance could conjure such a cohesive force in our lives? The words seemed to resonate against the walls she had carefully constructed. It was as if the very essence of community was singing the tune of her impending downfall, and her response to the truth became increasingly theatrical, a symphonic counterpoint to our joyous riot. "Oh, spare me the speeches and theatrics. You think this is some kind of game, don't you?" she exclaimed. And at that moment, the corners of the neighborhood were painted with fear and excitement. The illusion of control was slipping slowly from her grasp, and I felt giddy, anticipating the chaos that awaited once word hit her delicate ears about the full scope of what we were plotting. "Well, allow me to enlighten you," I said, unable to conceal my grin. "This party is our joyous uprising, and tonight we celebrate acceptance, diversity, and, most importantly, the ever-delightful theme of karmic retribution. Your reign as the grand dame of our pastel palace is about to be undone, my dear." As the tension reached a fever pitch, the sound of laughter bounced from my backyard, infiltrating Marge's tightly held bubble of entitlement. A couple of neighbors had begun to form a makeshift dance floor, while a gaggle of delighted children played in the grass with the balloons, an explosion of color against Marge's gray-scale palette. In that moment, I realized that her dysfunctional grip on the neighborhood could never extinguish the vibrant spirit bubbling right outside her door. I turned my attention back to her, relishing my position. But you know what's the most delicious part of this, Marge? We know how to laugh at ourselves, while you seem trapped in a world crafted from chrome and pretentiousness. With a dramatic flourish, I gestured toward the joyous chaos that was our gathering, feeling the weight of every word. She huffed indignantly, her thoughts tripping over themselves within her cloud of outrage. But rather than lasting fury, I noticed the inklings of worry flash across her face. It was a moment of raw panic, self-doubt creeping in. "You'll see," she cried, even as her voice quivered like a poorly executed melody. The sheer determination in her tone spiraled into the atmosphere, blending in with my laughter and spilling over the edges of our nightly gathering. I leaned in one last time, our faces close enough to share in the delight of reckoning. "Oh, Marge, we don't need to see anything more. You already created our love conquers all moment. Thank you for the inspiration." As I turned to walk away, my heart thumping with victory, I felt an exhilarating sense of empowerment surge through me. We had ignited a beacon of community and love that was brightly shining through the heart of our neighborhood, illuminating the absurdity of her attempts to control us. Who knew that Marge's fragile empire of entitlement would fall apart so spectacularly, a highlight reel of hilarity that any comedy producer would envy? I glanced over my shoulder at her, her eyes wide with disbelief, and knew the real question had finally emerged. Was she ready to face the truth that her reign of entitlement was merely a dimming star in a cosmic sea of acceptance and unity? The moment I turned my back, grinning like a Cheshire cat who just licked the cream, I felt an invisible weight lift off my shoulders. The joyous celebration resumed with a rhythm that felt electric, transforming our backyard into a haven of acceptance that was the very antithesis of Marge's constricting policies. Neighbors shared laughter over a plate of snacks as kids danced around with brightly colored balloons, each hop and squeal echoing the pulse of freedom. Luis, already caught up in the playful atmosphere, had turned a hula hoop into a makeshift prop, demonstrating how to sway with grace, or lack thereof. I couldn't help but chuckle at the sight. If there was ever a moment the neighborhood needed a mascot, Luis was it, weaving through the party as effortlessly as a seasoned performer on a grand stage. The raucous laughter carried on the breeze was punctuated by the sudden burst of fireworks from our indoor sparkler cake, the ingenious creation of my partner, who knew that celebrating was a requirement for those who dared to challenge the status quo. I had an inkling that Cynthia would have adored such a flamboyant display if only she could get past her inherited disdain for anything resembling fun. But in her failing attempts to maintain control, We had proven there was magic in shared humility and joy, qualities she would never grasp. "Watch where you're pointing that thing," I hollered toward Louise, who was enthusiastically waving around a lit sparkler before quickly extinguishing it like a toddler squashing a birthday candle too soon. But laughter erupted around us, the illuminating chaos, showcasing a spirit that sent Marge's rigid ideals crashing into the ground. As the festivities unfolded, I noticed a few of our neighbors whispering in corners, casting furtive glances toward the house adorned with pristine white shutters, the regime of Cynthia Barlow. It occurred to me that the real victory was no longer about me, or even my wedding. It was about awakening this community to the absurdity of fear-driven hostility dressed as decorum. I marveled at how our collective joy had become a rallying cry for acceptance, spreading like wildfire. I overheard older neighbors reminiscing about their own first romances, tales of flared tempers and bold choices, accompanied by fits of laughter that vibrated through the air like the upbeat strains of one of the party's favorite anthems. There was power in celebrating our differences, a power that seemed to terrify Marge to her very core. Then it happened, the unexpected twist in the evening's plot. Just as I was fixing myself another slice of the sparkler cake, I spotted Marge sulking at the corner of her iron-fenced yard, arms crossed, her expression oscillating between wary curiosity and disdain. I shot her a mock salute. How could I resist? And watched as she squirmed, as if her lawn's carefully placed roses were now sprouting discontent as well. Sensing an opportunity, I upturned an empty cupcake stand and called out, "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention? Join me in giving a thunderous round of applause to our special guest, professional party pooper number 1. Cue the dramatic gestures as I pointed at her with all the flair of a daytime talk show host. Louise, unable to contain his laughter, practically doubled over, which was contagious enough to elicit chuckles from the crowd. The camaraderie ignited once again as they rallied behind me, and I wondered if Marge was reconsidering her choice of neighborhood rebellion. As the crowd rallied together, I seized the moment, for this was not just about a simple backyard bash. It was about confronting the remnants of entitlement that clenched Marge's heart. "Marge, darling," I bellowed, my enthusiasm cloaked in tone that dripped with sarcasm. "Why don't you come join the fun? Clearly, you need to learn how to blend colors in your wardrobe and in your neighborhoods. The cake here has been mixed with love and sprinkles of acceptance, quite the recipe for joy. Wouldn't you agree?" What I assumed would further ignite her indignation turned out to flicker, just a little ember of interest in her steel-cold gaze. A contingent of curious neighbors gathered closer, drawn in by the camaraderie that my words had cast like a spell. Our neighborhood had become a microcosm for change, standing defiantly against the narrow views that risked consuming us all. But just as I felt the momentum swing heavily in our direction, an unexpected gust of winds, in the form of Marge's stubbornness, shot through the party like a stray firework. "You may find this entertaining, but I assure you, this is temporary," she shouted back, her voice brimming with a shaky attempt at authority. The moment I set my sights on enforcing the regulations to their full extent, you're all going to see just how serious I am about this breach of etiquette. The crowd reacted not with fear, but with laughter, every chuckle growing louder, rising like a wave building toward an epic crescendo. I watched as her words failed to land. It was as if she had suffered a swift and decisive defeat at the hands of a collective, joyful rhythm of acceptance. In the wild whirlpool of events, I felt emboldened, grabbing a nearby microphone. "Ladies and gentle neighbors, it's time we illuminate the truth about this fiasco. A true HOA horror story," I exclaimed, buoyed by the electricity of the night. "Together, we shall forge our fate as a united front, refusing to be defined by arbitrary rules that seek to keep us apart. You see, the real power of neighborhood regulations is collective laughter, love, and community spirit, not stale judgments and dated beliefs." The crowd erupted in cheers as we made a raucous cry against the absurdity that had threatened to stifle us. I stared back at Marge, whose eyes now widened with disbelief, watching the sheer joy erupting from what used to be her domain. Could it be true? Was she beginning to grasp the reality that we were no longer her subjects? As the night pressed on, we danced amid the eruption of ideas, hearts full of laughter that rang through the crisp air. I couldn't help but feel that this saga was the tipping point of transformation, an act so drastically ridiculous that even the concrete of Marge's ideas would begin to crack under the weight of our community's cohesive spirit. What began as a melodrama inspired by her prejudice turned into an anthem of love and celebration, leaving me wondering what would happen when the smoke cleared and the lights faded. Would Marge still sit at her window, clutching at old notions? Or would she finally step into the light of acceptance that had beckoned? Thanks for tuning in. It really means a lot to us. If you're still fired up from this HOA showdown, check out our next jaw-dropping battle on the right, or let YouTube surprise you with another wild ride on the left. Take your pick, and I'll see you in the next neighborhood drama.